Hello friends, this is the InStyle Knitting Studio. Today, we will get acquainted with the concept of rise loops. We will learn how to obtain a flat fabric when crocheting. In previous classes, we learned to crochet various columns with and without yarn overs. We saw that the height of these columns is different. Rise loops are the loops at the beginning of a new row. Therefore, the number of rise loops varies for different columns. The taller the column, the more rise loops are needed. If there are not enough rise loops, the fabric will be tightened at the sides. If there are too many loops, the edge will be uneven. Therefore, it is recommended to crochet connecting columns without rise loops. Columns without yarn overs require one rise loop. Columns with one yarn over require 2 chain rise loops. Columns with 2 yarn overs require 3 chain rise loops, and so on. For example, I crocheted a chain of 10 chain loops and a row of columns with 1 yarn over. I started with 10 chain loops, then 1 rise loop. I crocheted the next column into the 3rd chain loop. That is, the 1st and 2nd chain loops served as my 1st column. This is the 1st column of the chain, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 10. Columns were made together with the rise loops. Actually, columns without yarn overs with yarn overs can be crocheted in various ways. One can include rise loops in the total number of columns, or one can choose not to include them. Let's figure it out. Let's crochet the next row with columns with yarn overs. We will include our rise loops in the total number of columns. Here I have 10. Accordingly, in the next row, I should also have 10 loops, including the rise loops. Let's make 2 chain rise loops and turn our work. This is our first stitch accordingly. Now, we will knit the second stitch with a yarn over. The first one is already done. It is located above the stitch of the previous row. It is above the first stitch. We will knit the second stitch above the second stitch of the previous row. We will insert the hook into this loop. That is, above the second stitch. We will skip 1 loop. This is the loop of the first stitch of the previous row. We insert the hook into the second stitch and make a usual stitch with a yarn over. This completes our second stitch. Next, we will knit to the end of the row. We will count how many stitches we have. It should be 10. At the end of the row, we will make our last stitch in the last stitch of the previous row. And the last stitch of the previous row is our chain stitches. So we will insert the hook into this stitch and make the last stitch with a yarn over. Accordingly, we should have 10 stitches in the second row. Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's right. We included the rise stitches in the total count of stitches. Now let's knit in the next row with yarn over stitches, not including our rise stitches in the total count. Let's make 2 rise chain stitches. Turn the work. These 2 rise chain stitches are not included in the total count of stitches. So now we need to knit the first stitch with a yarn over. We will insert the hook into the loop of the first stitch of the previous row, right here. We have completed the first stitch. Then we will knit regular stitches to the end of the row. At the end of the row, we will make the last stitch into the stitch of the previous row. Let's count the number of stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. The rise stitches are not included in our total count. You can choose any of these methods, whichever you prefer, but I think you understood the essence. If we need to include our rise stitches in the total count of stitches, we will count them as the first stitch and knit the second stitch into the loop above the second stitch of the previous row, that is, skipping one loop right here. If we do not include these loops in the total number of stitches, we will start by crocheting the first stitch, the first loop of the previous row. I will also note that if you choose a particular method, you need to consistently crochet all rows in the same way. This means if you include the turning chains in the total number of stitches, you must include them in every subsequent row. This is a mandatory condition for the fabric to be even. I've crocheted several rows of stitches, including our turning chains in the total count, to see what edge we get, and if the fabric lays evenly. It is quite even. I will note that the last stitch of each row can be crocheted to the stitch of the previous row. Or you can do it between the stitches, between the last and the second last stitches of the previous row. I have crocheted into the stitch of the previous row here. This is how the fabric looks when we include our turning chains in the total number of stitches in the row. This is how the fabric looks if we do not include the turning chains in the total number of stitches. It is also quite even. At this point you do not need to crochet into the last stitch of the previous row. Choose any method you prefer. Experiment and tell me about your results. I will be happy to communicate with you. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you at the next class. Goodbye.